dragons and beasts, trumpets and seals, a mysterious Babylon and a glorious New Jerusalem. Welcome to the book of Revelation. Far from being just an ancient doomsday prediction, this final book of the Bible offers profound hope and a cosmic perspective on our world today. Join us for our series, Apocalypse Now, the book of Revelation, as we unpack apocalyptic imagery, unpack the historical context, and discover why Revelation isn't about predicting when the world ends, but about finding courage to live faithfully in the here and now. Through this series, we'll see how the often misunderstood book reveals God's ultimate victory over evil and extends an invitation to find our place in His great story. The apocalypse isn't just coming, it's already unfolding, and it's better news than you might think.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Bible Streams. We are a podcast who likes to dive deep into the text of the Holy Scriptures, specifically the Old and New Testament, and talk about some other fun things along the way as well.
It's not much more to it, is it?
Well, in case your understanding of the Holy Scriptures was different to ours. Yeah. We are currently in the midst of a fantastic series on the book of Revelation. We're finally getting to it, and we're getting through it. We'll be officially halfway by the end of this episode.
We will.
Which will be fantastic. My name is Chris. I am a member of Revived Baptist Church. And joining me, as always, these days is my lovely co-host, Alex.
Oh. Are you saying as always because there was a period of time where
you perhaps weren't joining us so regularly?
You felt a bit more ambivalent about the podcast.
Yes,
if that's something that weighs heavily upon you, then
it does.
You know,
I wake up in cold sweats every night. Thinking about those episodes I missed. It's good to be here, though. Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome. And also joining us is Pastor Joe Luton, who is the inaugurator and originator and perfecter of Bible Streams.
We'll see. In the fullness of time.
In the fullness of time. Has certainly been suffering with us the longest. So welcome, Joe.
Inflicting my suffering upon others. It's good to be here. It's good to be welcomed. Thank you, Chris.
No worries at all. Before we dive into things, gents, a reminder to our dear listeners that we love to interact with you. We love your feedback. We've been getting some good feedback now on these episodes we've been doing, so thank you for that. Please continue to send it through. You can connect with us via email. Yes. You can find us at podcasts@riverlifechurch.org.au, or we are on select social media. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. You can post something. You can send us a DM. You can comment on one of our lovely episode artworks.
Are we not on Instagram?
I said Instagram.
No, you said Facebook and Twitter.
Did I say Twitter?
Yeah.
Oh.
So I thought that's the one we're actually not on.
No, that is the one we're actually not on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Facebook and Instagram.
Gosh.
Viewers, listeners.
You can tell that we're recording this at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Sorry, listeners. We're not on Twitter or X for that matter.
Yeah.
We are, in fact, on Instagram.
That might be one of the rare occasions where I've been right about something like that.
True.
Yeah.
Doesn't bode well for all
a matter of
content.
social media or theology.
Yeah. Either or. Yeah.
In any case, you can probably just Google Bible Streams and you'll find us. It shouldn't be too hard.
Eventually,
yeah. And with that, having struggled through that opening, let's get into the text of Revelation. So today we are picking up exactly where we left off at the end of last episode, which was in the midst of 7 seals on a wondrous scroll being opened, and the 7 seals representing judgments of some kind. And we made it through 6, and then we had a bit of a long discussion, and we didn't get to the 7th one. So picking up in chapter 8 of Revelation, we'll start from verse 1.
Would you read for us, Chris?
I will. Great. When he opened the 7th seal, I think this is the Lamb doing the opening. Am I correct?
Yes, what it says in the ESV, when the Lamb opened.
Yes.
It is.
When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense together with the prayers of the saints went up before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth. And there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake.
Ooh. Wow.
There you go.
Very intense.
Well, one of the first things that we can make note of here is that this being the seventh seal.
Yeah. I was going to say, of course, then the introverts get to heaven half an hour early.
Yeah.
Because there's silence.
We talked about this, Joe.
We said we're not allowed
no
those
jokes.
No jokes.
No,
especially the ones that are overused like that one. This is
didn't
the seventh.
mention the seals at all.
That's true. You did well not to mention the seals. This is the seventh seal, so we're expecting, and we were expecting after it to occur after the sixth seal, but if you remember from last episode, we got that bit of an interlude period, which kind of left us on a bit of a cliffhanger thinking, and so I guess when we get to the seventh seal, we're expecting this big final judgment kind of, or maybe the readers were expecting that, but instead we get this kind of breaks the pattern and we get, silence in heaven for about half an hour. So breaks the mold a bit there, and we might see that as well when we come to the trumpets as well. We get a bit of a similar pattern unfold too.
Question is, why the silence and what does it mean?
I think I definitely take away a sense of anticipation because it's a very short silence, and relative to everything else that's going on. But this sense of they're waiting for something to happen. But as to why that silence, I think there are a couple of different interpretations. One being similar to how, at the beginning of this throne room scene, we were waiting on someone who was worthy to open the scroll. There's silence might be like another sense of the inadequacy of the witnesses or the host present. They need someone else to act. They need an agent of God to act to begin the next phase, the next thing. Might be one interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Another is the simple sense of awe and reverence and God's presence and everything that's unfolding, just sitting in silence. And I think that's got a bit of precedent as well with angelic companies who are said to sometimes be in full song, but then also sometimes full silence in reverence as well.
Yeah, Habakkuk 2:20.
Is that it? Great.
But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him.
There you go.
So but also potentially underlining the fact that we should be now expecting the final judgment. So this is the calm before the storm, so to speak.
I did also read that with regards to the prayers being offered in the incense, that it was also quite established practice in the temple to offer prayers and incense and sacrifice in silence, other than the person doing the praying, obviously.
I read that too, with the variation being that the angels were to be silent so that the prayers of the people could be heard. Yeah.
Because we do straight away kind of get this angel with a golden censer with incense, which is connected to the prayers of the saints, quite specifically here on the golden altar before the throne. So, yes, I think that's all. It's all interwoven. Again, classic John in Revelation, just weaving all of these different threads together into the same moment, which does also then raise a question about, we've got 7 angels and then another angel. So we've got 8 angels in this 2 verses here. The angels get the trumpets and then another angel shows up with the golden bowl. Are we to assume, I found in the commentaries I read, no one connected these to the other lots of 7 angels that we've already had. I'm like, well, could it not be the same 7 angels from earlier? But we get 7 angels who get 7 trumpets.
Well, we might dig into this a little bit more, but, depending on your interpretive schema, some see the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls all being sort of co-occurring.
Yeah.
And effectively
Let's talk about that,
representing the same types of judgments, just different pictures unfolding through John's vision, not necessarily in chronological order, but in a kind of theological order that gives more depth and clarity on sort of the types of things that are supposed to be unfolding.
So essentially we have 7 things from 3 different angles, not 21 different things.
Correct.
So we get this pattern, this rhythm, and different kind of aspects of them are drawn out for the different perspectives that we see for them, potentially.
Which also fits into, and again, it depends a little bit on how you read it, but how the trumpets all seem to kind of nest within the 7th seal.
Yeah.
And then the bowls all seem to nest within the 7th trumpet and sort of like, little Russian dolls. But again, some people interpret it quite differently and see these as, 21 different unfolding judgments in chronological order.
Yeah. I like seeing them as like, the Russian doll analogy, or like interlocking like the seventh one of each interlocks with the first of the next kind of thing. And that recapitulating idea where, maybe they each draw out a different aspect or heighten it or from a different perspective, but they all seem to share a lot of similarities, especially we don't get to the bowls today, do we? But the trumpets and the bowls share a lot of similarities as well, as we'll start to see as we move forward.
But even the trumpets and the seals, we'll talk about the plagues and the echoes specifically of the Exodus plagues. And 10 verses 7 don't necessarily match equally, but the kinds of things that are being talked about are very much overlapping. Hail, water turning to blood, darkness, locusts and animals and vermin and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, we'll unpack it when we get there. So, but is there anything to really pick up about these angels? Is there anything we need to know about that? Or is that just, we know these is just the constant kind of mediating agents of God's plans and purposes in this scene? So they're just another bunch of angels show up.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's important for us to identify whether they're 7 distinct angels from the 7 that came before. I think more important is that it's the same number, and as we'll see, later we get between the 7 bowls, thunders. There's all different types of groups of 7s, which may invariably represent different heavenly bodies. But
what you may be driving at, Joe, is that 7 angels with trumpets specifically, there is an association in Jewish literature with the 7 archangels.
True.
But I think if you'll pardon the pun, that's a long bow to draw for an angel. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I see what you did there. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. But what we do find is the single angel, the one that stood out. We kind of actually have come full circle, and we're back to the golden altar, which is where we had the prayers of the martyrs in chapter 6, and the cry of those who have been martyred for the sake of the kingdom and for Christ, saying, when will you vindicate us? And so we kind of have come full circle. So now seems to be an addressing of this question.
That's it. We get some sort of vindication, right? Because the spiritual reality of the prayer is then reflected in, an earthly reality where there is an effect, there is an action in response from heaven affecting earth, affecting the world in response to these prayers. And that's represented by the thunder and the earthquakes and the fire and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is interesting. So you guys might have picked this up too as you're reading. We get now another kind of parentheses between here and the end of our section today, which is chapter 11, where we get this idea of thunder and rumblings and lightning, and which is all, hopefully, as you've been engaging with Scripture, you're thinking, and every time I see a picture, particularly this far towards the end of the Bible, have I seen this picture somewhere before? And so we instantly should be thinking, okay, there's a connection to Exodus here. This is God on the mountain revealing his plans, his covenant purposes, thunder and lightning. And we get this at either side of these trumpets and woes that we'll look at today. And the Exodus theme is going to be quite strong for a lot of this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we might then launch into the 7 trumpets, and they're structured in kind of, I suppose, 2 units. So we've got an initial 4 trumpets that get unpacked, and then we get the last 3 trumpets that are also, grouped together as the 3 woes, and we'll get to that in a little bit as well. With the 7th trumpet coming much, much later, after again a little bit of an interlude, because we like doing 6 and then taking a break.
Yeah.
But let's get into the first 4 as well, picking up from chapter 8, verse 6. Then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down upon the earth. 1/3 of the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. 1/3 of the sea turned into blood, 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. 1/3 of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of them turned dark. 1/3 of the day was also without light, and also 1/3 of the night. As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blasts about to be sounded by the other 3 angels."
It's getting a little bit intense right now.
Just a little bit.
So probably leading into this section, it seems, if we're taking this kind of reiteration of what we've already had before, we're getting this judgment on the earth starting again, but it seems like it's escalated a little bit, and we've definitely got a different perspective now. So if you think back, maybe when we talked about the seals, this is some of my recollections, and you might have different opinions, gentlemen, so please disagree with me. It did seem like stuff was happening, but it wasn't as destructive. The four horsemen, like, this is bad. This is like, suddenly the means of providing food is becoming scarce and it's hard and there's people dying, but it doesn't seem as catastrophic as how it's described here. This does seem like it's escalated, which kind of is an interesting, again, echo. If we take just the last little bit, like I said before about Exodus, into now what's happening with these trumpets, and even the chapter before, we're going to get this Ezekiel kind of model too, where the saints are sealed, but then God pours out fire from the altar onto the earth to judge it, and now we see the expression of that. And so we get this kind of playoff between the sealed saints of God and the unrepentant residents of the rest of the world who are being judged. And so would it be fair to say that maybe we're seeing now the judgment from the unsealed, unrepentant side of the world, as opposed to maybe we're seeing it from the perspective of the saints and what was happening then on the world from their perspective before in the seals?
Yeah, that's possible. I probably looked at it more from the perspective of, and it's interesting, you already pointed out the four horsemen being the first four of the seals, and now we've got four
trumpets,
four trumpets, and I don't know if you want to call it four kind of cosmological catastrophes. I would have maybe seen it initially, at least on face value, in more of those terms. So one is speaking about the human perspective, because the four horsemen are really about, I think we talked about this 2 episodes ago, about the effects of war and violence and interpersonal kind of conflict. Whereas this one kind of speaks more about the externalities of the world and how they can affect people in the world, and whether it's literal fire from heaven or a meteor or a volcano or an earthquake or some sort of other natural disaster. That's how I would have read it, at least initially. But no, that's an interesting way of looking at it too.
Yeah, I read it the same way as Chris. I feel like this brings on the creation side of it a bit more than like the human forces of the horsemen a bit. And I think that plays into a little bit what, like we talked about, the martyrs at the altar crying out for, how long will this go unpunished? And I think we are expecting that it is the wicked that will be punished, but that punishment initially doesn't actually fall on the wicked. It falls on creation itself in a way. And it will indirectly affect them. It destroys their ships, it damages the economy, things like that. And eventually we get to that judgment where people do end up dying. But
do you think it's judgment on creation, or God's using creation as the act? That's
what I mean.
Because it starts to sound like Romans, like the earth is groaning, waiting for this all to be sorted out. Right?
I think there's this ironic piece where it's, creation who worship and praises God eternally is in a way suffering. And there's an injustice there where it's the wicked who should be receiving the judgment that they deserve. And so that brings up this whole idea of like, is this still an opportunity for repentance? Is this demonstration still an opportunity for the wicked to turn back and to repent? And then I think we see as the judgments progress that just the natural kind of disaster that starts happening does not really result in repentance. So yes, further measures need to be taken.
Pardon me. So probably worth then talking about these 4 particular trumpets and what they're doing, and where we might see resonances in Scripture related to these. So the first one is hail and fire mixed with blood thrown down. A third of the earth is burned up. All the green grass and a third of the trees. That's bad news.
And this starts our association with Exodus that we'll see a lot throughout the next bit of Revelation. But hailstorms and mixed with fire, I think, as well in the Exodus account, kind of fall down on the Egyptians right before the Israelites escape and get out of captivity. I think it's also in one of the Psalms as well. But then also all throughout Ezekiel, I think, also has a lot of parallels in these next bits, but also against Gog and other enemies of God in Ezekiel 38. There's similar hailstorms. Yeah.
And the effects are, again, sort of both natural and economic. So the grass being destroyed means, fodder for cattle and livestock.
All the grass is gone.
Yeah.
That's bad news.
Destroyed.
Is it not a third, sorry?
No, all the green grass.
All the green grass.
A third of the trees, a third of the
trees,
earth.
a third of the
and
earth,
then the trees being implied, the fruit-bearing trees, and the earth being the source of, I guess, agriculture, which, again, I think connects it quite clearly to the effects of some of the horsemen under the seals as well.
Yeah.
So the second one is something like a great mountain burning with fire thrown into the sea. The sea becomes blood, and the living creatures in the sea die, and a third of the ships are destroyed, or a third of them are destroyed and killed.
Yeah.
Familiar again?
Yeah. I think this one's a slightly trickier one. What I was reading, the key word here is like a burning mountain, where we shouldn't understand this actually as a mountain being thrown into the sea, but something that the author describes as like a burning mountain. So that's led to interpretations as this is a star or a other astronomical
meteor
or comet or something like that.
Although, interestingly, I did see a commentator speculating, really, but pointing out that if this was written after the eruption of Vesuvius,
yes, I saw that too,
that it could in fact be a reference to not the mountain itself being thrown into the sea, but the eruption from the mountain then debris falling into the sea, which, if you know anything about that disaster, did include, massive volcanic flows that, boiled up and burned up the water, obviously destroyed a couple of cities that were quite nearby, and also impacted the fish and sea life as well.
And Vesuvius was what, 70, 80 AD, around that
79?
time? 79, something like that. So that fits into the dating discussion there about around the right time.
And I think it was Pliny the Elder who wrote about it, and you read his description of it, it's very similar to what John's alluding to here. He's like sailing towards it because he wants to get in and observe it all because he's trying to write an encyclopedia. And it's horrific,
Yeah. I think it might have been Pliny the Younger who wrote about it, because I think Pliny the Elder died
in it. Yeah. So he went towards it to write about
Joe,
it.
I can't believe you've just made that mistake. That's really embarrassing for you.
Well, you're right.
I just want to apologize to all the listeners.
That Pliny the Elder was the one who wrote the encyclopedia. Yeah.
Strabo's my favorite in terms of the
Of course he
geographers.
is. Anyway.
Here you go. Yep. Died while attempting the rescue of a friend and her family from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius.
There you go.
There's, to bring it back to the Bible, there's also a passage in Jeremiah 51 that calls Babylon a destroying mountain that will become a burned out mountain under God's judgment. So that's a bit of similar imagery as well.
You say Jeremiah?
Yeah, Jeremiah 51. Yeah.
Anything else to say about the second one?
Is the second one...
Exodus 7, the Nile turning to blood.
Yes, I was going to say, this is also the one where the sea becomes blood.
Yep.
That's an easy Exodus one. And then, like we talked about with the grass and affecting agriculture, similar thing. A third of the living creatures dying in the sea and ships being destroyed. Serious impact in terms of economy, trade, the fishing industry. Very bad. Yeah.
No ships to catch the fish and no fish.
No.
So,
which actually ties then, again, if we keep thinking kind of these paired moments in Revelation, this ties into what we'll read about in chapter 18 about the merchants of the world and what they can and can't do anymore because of how the judgments are progressing. So just a little teaser throwing forward there.
Third one?
Third trumpet.
This is my favorite just because wormwood is such a cool word, isn't it? So cool.
Yes. Yes, indeed, Alex, it is. Tell us about wormwood.
Anyway, well, the third angel, we get another object falling from the heavens. This one is probably easier to delineate as something from the sky rather than a mountain. But this one seems to be a star or a meteor or a comet or something like that. In the Greco-Roman world, in some of their literature, meteors were sometimes compared with torches or called torches. So that association in the text maybe leads us to call this a meteor. But yeah, it was a portend of impending doom either way. So fits the judgment pretty well. And then, it's wormwood and stuff like that, which is what, everybody? Because we all know what wormwood is.
It's a plant.
It is.
And I did not know this until
really?
I knew it was a plant. Oh. But the fact I'm about to tell you, I did not know until I researched this.
I'm excited now.
So the Greek word is absinthon, which is where you get absinthe and also vermouth from wormwood.
Yeah.
There you go.
Germans.
I read that too, and I didn't know it either.
Yeah, so
it's pretty cool.
Fascinating.
Hey? Yeah.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
Which means
so what do we make
I
of this,
think really
So
these
all
guys
the water
should have
turned to
tried
absinthe.
harder to drink the water because it's probably
It's
possible.
absinthe or vermouth.
Yeah.
It's like a really dry martini.
Yeah.
But what do we make of this? What's going on?
Well, wormwood is not a star that we know exists from ancient descriptions of the sky. So they're not imagining a physical star from their constellations descending, as far as I can tell.
Well, I think they maybe or maybe not. I think the wormwood, I think, is more a reflection of this perception that the impact is poisonous to the water sources.
Yeah.
Because not that wormwood isn't actually that poisonous, but it's very, very bitter, and so it was perceived in the ancient world as being potentially poisonous.
And would make your food completely inedible.
Yeah, and
even
so
a small amount.
And so whereas the second trumpet impacted the sea and the seawater, this is impacting fresh water and its impacts. Its kind of economic provision, to the world, as a source of sustenance, as a source of watering crops and agriculture, as itself a source of food for fish and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. There's also, again, in Jeremiah, interesting parallels between, they use this little doublet a couple of times, bitter food and poisoned water. So got a bit of that precedent there too.
And really throwing to any time we see the Israelites finding bitter water in the wilderness, it's connected to the same concept as well. So Deuteronomy and all of that. So, and which is some level of either withholding of God withholding provision or a judgment upon the disobedience of the people. So we're seeing it all kind of, John's pulling in as he's seeing this, he's attaching it to everything he can think of that makes sense of what's going on there.
Yep.
It's also, the Sibylline oracles also talked about a star falling into the water that would burn up and act. So
there you go.
Yep. Lots of ancient Jewish prophecies around this, which does bring us then, you guys. Nope, to chapter 8, verse 12, which is the fourth trumpet.
Yes, again, similar to one of the Exodus plagues.
Which one, Alex?
The 9th, I believe. Well, that's what I have written down, so I hope it's correct.
I think you're
from
correct.
my memory.
Darkness.
Yes. And that was 3 days for the Egyptians. Although it's difficult to tell from our Revelation passage whether this third refers to the overall level of light on the world is being reduced by a third, or whether like a third of the day is cast into complete darkness, or some variations of that. But we do know it somehow affects the light levels.
But it's not complete yet.
No.
Which I think is one of the things it is pointing out, that there's...
Again, ties into there's still a call to repentance
exactly
as well.
right. Because darkness is a mixed metaphor in Scripture. Sometimes God's described as dwelling in thick darkness, but then also darkness comes as a response of disobedience and judgment and all this kind of thing. So it's a complex space.
Yeah. And then darkness as a kind of meteorological phenomenon, like, in an eclipse or that sort of thing, is very much associated with divine judgment, or at least divine
impending
portent.
Disaster.
Yes.
And, I mean, including, we see darkness fall upon the earth, or at least upon Jerusalem at Christ's crucifixion. So,
correct.
A conveying of, at the very least, God's disfavor or sorrow or anger, or potentially also wrath.
Which probably is, we should have done this earlier, but it's a good spot right now to stop and go, why trumpets? We talked about seals and what seals were, because they were maybe unfamiliar to some of our listeners, but trumpets are probably a much more familiar concept. But why use this imagery or this process of trumpets? There's a lot about trumpets in Scripture. Why do we think that John's seeing this from God? Why is God showing him trumpets being blown and judgments happening?
It's one of the best instruments ever,
says the trumpet player.
Yeah.
It's probably slightly more evocative than the 7 clarinets or flutes of judgment.
That's true.
The 7 French horns.
The 7 French horns.
Woe.
Oh, that would be truly terrible, wouldn't it? Yeah. Trumpets throughout, especially the prophetic books, herald judgment usually, or associated with the day of the Lord. So I think Joel 2 particularly.
Instruments that can be used for both worship and for war.
Yes. Yeah,
right?
correct.
So,
interesting connection to the Jericho story when there were 7 days of going and walking around the city and blowing trumpets, and then on the last day, the change, and then the judgment, the fall of Jericho happens on the 7th time. So it's interesting that all of these numbers are all interconnected here as well. And the priests and the temple imagery that we have in Revelation, it was the priests who are taking the trumpets and blowing the trumpets with the ark and everything like that. So, the 6th and then the last, the kind of motif is very familiar. We shouldn't be surprised that we're seeing this here.
Not at all.
Anything else? I know in the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the sectarian writing, so the Essenes, or if they were Essenes and Qumran. The Qumran scrolls, there's the Scroll of War, which is a pretty boss name for
that's cool.
A scroll. And in there, they talk about 7 priests blowing 6 trumpets of slaughter.
Oh.
Yeah. So in their whole thing was like God's coming to judge the earth. And so this is probably something which wasn't an unfamiliar concept in the view of how the world would end for the people of the 1st and 2nd centuries, particularly in that Jewish and Christian environment. So this is something that's sitting there, but as God shows John what's going to happen, is bringing clarity to what those things are potentially. But then there's the trumpets at the Jewish festivals as well. So which celebrate God's work and God bringing in rest and space for his people and all sorts of things like that. So.
It probably reflects a little bit, right, that the recipients of these judgments, it depends on where they stand, right, before the Lord as to how they're received. And much like with the seals, right, if a seal is opened, if you're the beneficiary, you could be in for something fantastic. But if it's a written judgment against you, then you could be in for a lot of trouble. A trumpet, similarly, if you are right with the Lord, you may hear it as, a call to worship and praise and glory. But if you're an enemy of God, it's a trumpet of war and a sound of his impending marching, to carry out his judgment.
Exactly right. And definitely something you can't ignore.
No.
Just having stood next to Alex playing his trumpet back in the day, you can't ignore it.
Yeah. Although the Israelites themselves were also aware from their own literature that a trumpet would be associated with, like blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm, would be associated with the day of the Lord as well. Yeah. And the idea of judgment too.
But even that, which we've covered in many previous podcasts at different times, the day of the Lord is an ambiguous concept anyway.
I know, celebration and judgment.
Yeah, exactly right, which Chris was just talking about. Yeah. But I think in all of this, as we looked at these 4 trumpets, they are declaring what God's doing, but it's all incomplete. Like it's only a third. It's a third. So there's definitely still this sense, I think, we have at this point, which is all about to shift, I think. But at this point, God's not doing complete overhaul, destruction, judgment. There's actually this space of, this is who I am. I've actually just been reading Job in my Bible reading plan for the year. And I just got to that last bit of Job where God says, okay, you finished talking, everyone. Now listen to what I can do, and just lays it out for him. And we kind of have that. Like everyone's kind of theorizing. Well, God's doing this and God's doing that. God's about to go. Hang on, here's what's going to happen. But anything else to say about those first 4 trumpets before we jump into the eagle?
The eagle.
No, I don't think so.
Great.
Yeah.
What about eagles?
Talking eagle.
Whoa,
it's cool.
See, you like that?
Yeah, I like it.
Sorry, that took me a bit too long.
The eagle does say woe 3 times.
It does say woe. 3 woes.
To be associated with the next 3 trumpets?
Yes. So we get woes a lot in Scripture. They are sort of, I don't know, are they sort of like particularly harsh judgments?
They seem to be, yes.
Yeah. It's just not
Jesus has 7 woes.
Not your ordinary judgments, fellas. These are the good ones or the bad ones.
Yeah, the big ones.
The big ones. Yeah. Why an eagle? Unclear. It's a bit random. Because, could just have easily been an angel, I suppose. We do have the 4 kind of creatures earlier in the chapter. It might be evoking some sense of that. Yep. Angels often depicted with wings, maybe. The most fun interpretation, which I don't know if it's in fact correct, is that it is supposed to be associated with the Roman eagle. It's the standard.
I think that's
the legions.
I think that's the most sensible, to be honest.
You reckon?
I completely disagree.
Oh, no, well, sorry, not necessarily the exact Roman eagle, but more the ancient world's affinity for augury and seeing eagles.
That one could be.
No,
I'm talking about the one where it's kind of this idea where, because we're later in the book, we're moving into this space where Rome gets specifically called out. We're starting to introduce characters to symbolize that, this might of the Roman Empire is not perhaps so mighty as it thought. So
No.
using its own symbol to call out woe that will soon fall upon it, is a nice little satirical piece. But
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced.
I like it, but
it's
it's
awfully
not
specific,
It's not
doesn't it?
strong.
Yeah.
But in that, like, it's suddenly now, like, we don't see the whore of Babylon then doing God's work.
No.
We don't see the bad images doing the good. Like, the good is a ambiguous term here. The intentional work of God. I did read that too. I think the portent kind of, that's probably got a little bit more valency. But I reckon it seems to be, I don't know, my theory is it's just another one of the angels in this particular expression, because it's not unfamiliar. We've had it Ezekiel.
I feel like they would have named it as an angel if that was the case, because they're not afraid to just say angel this, angel that, right?
Yeah, I
but
don't know.
yeah, maybe. Yeah. Either way, it's
either
associated
way.
with the heavens in a way. It's in the sky.
Yeah.
It's up there. Yeah.
As we jump into what now the eagle is introducing, it is kind of cool, like you were just saying, Chris, with kind of Rome imagery and that kind of stuff. Like, we've had this kind of Exodus and Egypt imagery that's becoming universalized, maybe have this Roman kind of thread, which you've already had from earlier in the book anyway, kind of coming through. And we see that being expanded out universally now. And we're going to get all of these oppositions to God called by Rome, Egypt, Babylon. We're supposed to pick that up though. So it's not ridiculous to think eagle, Rome connection, but we're definitely going to see God judge all of those images in the next little while.
Well, yeah. I think that is actually the reason why I'm not sure that it does refer specifically to Rome, because I think we're still in the midst of the Egypt phase.
I agree. Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get to that. We might take a short break.
We'll start reading from chapter 9, verse 1. The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. And out of the smoke locusts came down on the earth, and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not allowed to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months, and the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes. During those days, people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers like scorpions, and in their tails they had power to torment people for 5 months. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon, that is, destroyer. The first woe is past, 2 other woes are yet to come. The sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the 4 horns of the golden altar that is before God. It said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." And the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000, and I heard their number. The horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. 1/3 of mankind was killed by the 3 plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshipping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts.
Oof.
You'd think.
Rough.
You'd think you'd stop.
This is a hard saying. Okay.
All right.
Chapter 9.
The fifth angel.
Fifth angel, the first woe, the opening of the abyss. Ooh. Okay, what's going on here?
Should we talk about the abyss?
Or
should we talk about the star first?
Well, the star comes first.
The angel comes first.
Okay.
Let's do the angel, yeah.
The fallen star from heaven, which Alex has decided is an angel because he was given a key.
Sorry.
Why do you think it's an angel, Alex?
Okay, well, I will outline some of the reasons that it has variously been interpreted as an angel.
Great.
But before we do that, it has also been interpreted as either Satan or a demonic being. So here are some reasons it could be an angel. An angel could descend from heaven. Although I'd say this is probably a stronger argument for the opposite one, but yeah. When stars fall in chapter 6 and chapter 8, it does not signify God's judgment against the stars, but against the earth.
Mm-hmm.
When an angel descends with the key to the abyss in chapter 20, verse 1, it is clear that the angel is from God. I think this is one of the stronger arguments for this one, that this, an angel attending the abyss like the angel does here, that one is clearly an angel.
Yeah.
And not a demonic being.
A good angel.
Yeah. And so if you were to not see this one as a good angel, you would need to see them as different, completely different creatures. Whereas in this interpretation, they may be the very same angel. It seems unlikely that the angel with the key in this verse here is the same as the demonic angel known as Abaddon or Apollyon later in verse 11.
That's true.
Since the first angel opens, like this angel here, opens the abyss from the outside, whereas the destroyer in verse 11 is king of the locusts that are inside the abyss and seems to emerge from the abyss as the leader of that army.
Very cool.
I think those are probably the strongest ones that I read for that interpretation, where it's seen as a good angel opening the abyss.
I think one of the arguments to say it's not a good angel is that it's not called an angel.
Yes, that is
everywhere else it is called an
that
angel.
That is a good one. The one I used on you last chapter for the eagle.
Correct. See, it comes around.
Yeah.
Like a snake. Its head inflicts a wound. So the other option is that it's a demonic angel or Satan, who's also a demonic angel, but the big one.
The main one.
The arguments for that.
The arguments from that, the star, so I'll call it a star now if we're not going to call it an angel, is said to have...
The text says.
Well, sorry, yes. Said to have fallen from heaven to earth, which is a common description for angels that have fallen out of favor with God, or just heavenly beings that have fallen out of favor with God.
Because there's different words used.
Yeah.
And this one is the word for fallen, not descended.
Descended, correct. And I think it's Revelation 12, where we get that description of the devil and his angels being cast down from heaven to earth. Similarly, in Isaiah 14, the king of Babylon comes under God's judgment, like the morning star that has fallen from heaven.
Yep.
And similarly in Luke 10 as well, where Jesus talks about Satan falling from heaven like lightning.
I think First Enoch as well, if you're looking for extra biblical
descriptions. There's also
descriptions.
First Enoch, which is a fantastic book, very interesting. Falling stars usually cast in negative light or things like that in Greco-Roman literature as well. I think those are probably the big ones. And I think this opinion usually identifies the fallen star of 9:1 with the destroyer in 9:11.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the Greek form of the word that's used there as well, I think is shows us that it's happened in the past, that this is someone who's fallen and it's done. It's not someone who's coming down. It's not one of the angels who's involved in the unfolding judgments of God.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
I think it makes more sense to see it as not an angel and as a demonic being. But then I really struggle with the Revelation 20, where it's clearly an angel from God that opens the abyss. So I guess in that sense, they are just two different entities.
We do, as you've already read, but as we'll discuss later, is these 4 angels in the Euphrates. So
true.
It's all very, ambiguous. Christopher,
But
anything to add to
those
that?
are the
before
two
we jump
sides in general.
to the abyss.
Look, I'm not going to take any sides, but I enjoyed your explanation.
Okay, great. Perfect. Do you want to tell us about the abyss then?
Sure. Well, the abyss.
Chris and the abyss. Sorry.
Chris, about the abyss.
Not because I associate you with the
Chris
abyss,
on
but
the
just
abyss?
because they rhyme. Yeah.
Chris with the abyss.
on the precipice of the abyss.
Oh, I hope not. So the abyss. It depends a little bit on whether we read this from a more Jewish or a more Hellenistic Greek kind of perspective. But it's a feature of ancient cosmology either way. And so we talked a little bit about this in our Genesis series, that, the understanding of the way the world, the physical world was constructed doesn't necessarily align with our, modern scientific, Copernican view of how everything works. And in the Jewish concept, the abyss is kind of, in the first instance, the primordial waters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so actually in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, you know, when it talks about the Spirit hovering over the face of the deep, that word deep, tehom, that's the abyss in the primordial sense, this kind of chaotic, unformed, and in a sense evil, but not strictly speaking evil.
Chaos, not
Chaos.
evil.
Yeah.
Unformed. And disorder.
Certainly ungodly.
Yes.
And out of which then God forms the order of the world. And then from that point on, the kind of earthly waters, so, you know, the ocean and the deep sea, is then also referred to at times as the abyss, as kind of the created, I suppose, echo of that primordial chaos, and continues in Jewish literature to be associated with chaos and death. And so you see, you know, Jonah is taken down into the abyss when he's in the belly of the fish. We see creatures like the Leviathan and other sort of Jewish mythological chaos monsters, if in a sense, emerging out of this place. And you've got a similar concept in Greek cosmology as well, where it sort of referred to as Tartarus as one of the places of the underworld, or places of Hades, and we talked a little bit about Hades a few episodes ago, and is specifically the deepest kind of pit of the underworld where the most wicked, most evil creatures are bound and imprisoned, perhaps one day to emerge in a moment of judgment, perhaps not. Depends on your specific mythology. But I think you could potentially see both concepts at play here, because as we'll begin to unfold, something does emerge out of this abyss, and it is an agent of decreation in a sense, and it's very much an agent of judgment in Revelation.
At this point, Chris, to clarify, are the abyss and Hades distinct entities in Revelation's thinking, and then also kind of lake of fire? Are they all distinct entities, or are they used as synonyms? Or
I think they are related, but they are distinct. In the same way as all toads are frogs and not all frogs are toads. And
is that true? There you go. I learned something new.
All squares are rectangles and not all rectangles are squares.
I know that one.
I think Hades is a catch-all for the grave, for the place where the dead dwell.
Okay, yeah.
And the abyss, or Tartarus, or the pit, is a sort of specific connotation of that, a focus area of wickedness.
It's it's the neighborhood inside that you don't want to move into.
The bad neighborhood.
But we do know there is some kind of semantic connection, because in chapter 1, verse 18, the risen Christ is said to hold the keys of death and Hades, and now we have a key that's given to this figure to unlock.
True.
So there is some kind of connection here that the keys that he has unlocks things, and this has been given to whichever agent is unlocking it, whether it's good or bad. It's being unlocked, and the only person so far in the story who's got keys is Jesus. So it's connected, I think, in some way.
But should that mean, therefore, we refer to this fallen star?
Well, not necessarily.
This key is no longer given to Jesus. Yeah,
he was given the key. Yeah, and so Jesus doesn't need to give anyone the key.
Yeah.
So that's a lot about keys and the abyss. What happens out of this? There's some interesting things here, and I've got questions. But you can start.
Well, some things come out of it.
Let's
talk about that. First of all, smoke. Like smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened, so
never a good sign.
Yep.
And this is where we start to get our medieval images of hell and judgment and Satan and all this kind of stuff, because they've taken these, and Dante and others later on after him have started to create imagery around this.
Yeah, which is interesting, because when I hear the term abyss, maybe it's because of its modern usage as well, but even in the context of the Revelation, I always think of water, and not fire.
Correct.
But anyway.
Really? Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Do you think it's fair to say at this point it's moving from, we've seen, even with the 4 horsemen and then the first 4 trumpets, we're seeing stuff happen on the earth. Now we're going to the spiritual, the unseen realm. Now we're seeing things that are happening kind of behind the scenes
I think
in the cosmos.
Especially when we're about to see what comes out of them. Yeah. It's hard to imagine them as part of the created earth as we know it.
It's Apache helicopters, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Stinger missiles in their tails.
The Russian, is it the HU?
Oh, yeah.
27s, yeah.
Depends on who your evil empire is.
Yeah. we see spiritual things happening, but they still have physical ramifications, right? Yeah. So,
well, the smoke festival is again in Greco-Roman, the Hellenistic world, a portent of disaster.
Yep.
Whenever smoke's rising out of something, darkening the sky.
We just had that with the
with
mountain.
One of the trumpets as well. And interesting parallel here, I think, that I read in one of the commentators I was reading. In heaven, the smoke of incense accompanies the prayer. It's like the smoke of the divine glory fills the celestial temple, similar to the tabernacle, to Sinai, things like that. But here, it's kind of the opposite. The smoke is sinister in the abyss, and it's kind of that mirroring. So it's not life, but it's
and then
chaos.
The locusts emerge.
Oh yeah, and these things are weird.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the locusts.
Well, first of all, locusts as just locusts are frequent
weird.
in the Old Testament. Oh,
and
sure,
bad
weird.
enough.
Yeah, they're bad enough. Obviously, in terms of famine and things like that, eating crops, appearing in plagues throughout the Old Testament. That's a pretty common feature of locusts. Think Joel 2, Exodus 10. Yes. But these locusts are kind of like augmented.
Well, yeah. They're genetically modified locusts, which should make us start to think that maybe these aren't normal or even literal locusts.
Or a specific earthly creature that we can associate with.
Because they're not just locusts, they're also given the power of scorpions, which sounds like any dozens of Japanese anime. It's locust given power of scorpion. It's just like
that was bold.
No, but it's like this is what I grew up on Dragon Ball Z. This is what it sounds like, right?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
You're the Pokemon fan, anyway. They're not normal, right?
No,
but they are, and they're spiritually motivated because they don't attack the people who are sealed in God.
Yes, and that sealing is. I think we spoke about it last episode, I think, but similar to the Ezekiel passage with the man with the linen kit, and similar to Passover, where the foreheads are marked of those who are, detest the wicked practices of the world. In Ezekiel's case, is the wickedness that's happening in Jerusalem. And yes, then some angels, and we'll get to that soon, but come around and exterminate those who do not have seals. And in this case, the locust creatures aren't actually allowed to kill anything, but they're not allowed to torment those who are sealed.
And I don't know how they're not supposed to harm the grass of the earth, because isn't it already gone?
Well, yes. That is something I did pull up.
That's one of my questions.
Makes us
loophole.
Well, I think that kind of fits into the way that we've been looking at this. Is it's not necessarily a chronological sequence of judgments, necessarily literal, but a recapitulation of similar themes. Yeah.
And they have a king.
Well, should we get to their description first, or do we talk about the king
I thought
first?
you were just talking about how weird they looked. Was the description of the description?
They've also got teeth like lions.
Yeah, there's all of the big long
women's hair.
Yes.
They have faces that resemble human faces.
Yes.
It's a lot of stuff.
Well, there are theories about then who these locusts are. So one of them is they're modern attack helicopters, right? Yes.
Yes.
I've actually heard that. I've read
I
that in commentary.
I have also actually heard
and I'm
that.
here to tell you right now, everyone, I'm ruling that one out for you.
Oh.
Okay.
On what grounds?
And if I'm wrong, then strike me down.
I have a theory.
Okay, yeah.
It's not my theory. I heard a theory that I find compelling.
Please share.
Yet not necessarily exhaustive of the image. Well, one of the theories is they're describing the Parthian Empire, which was one of the scourges of the at that time modern world, the Roman world. The Parthians were long-haired warriors who would ride horses. They would ride forward but shoot backwards, so we get this moving forward, hair flowing but a sting in the tail. They would wear armor. They would move quickly. They kind of like they came on the wind because they would ride down from the mountains. They would quickly strike. They would destroy. They were generally detested by the Romans, mostly because they were feared by the Romans and they didn't fear much. They also found them quite effeminate because the Romans wore their hair short and these Parthians had their hair long. So they were just everything they were uncouth and uncivilized, and we don't like them. But I think suspiciously it was just below the surface because they were better than them. But
scared of them,
definitely. There's one theory that there's a bit of an allusion to this because the people at the time would have understood that that's an agent of judgment, which seems to be unable to be conquered and overcome. We don't know how to handle that. So that's one theory.
And supporting that as well, which we'll get to soon, is the Euphrates imagery, which serves as the outer boundary of the Roman Empire and a place from which they feared the Parthians to come from.
Yes. And as we have previously alluded to in other episodes, the horsemen have connection to the Parthian Empire as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. It's all interrelated.
Basically, everyone, if you want to know more about this imagery, you should just go read like all of Joel, because it taps into pretty much everything here.
Yeah.
So,
is there anything else we need to pick up from Joel as we talk about this, or do we jump into what's next?
I was just going to say, if you do favour literal interpretation, I will give credit to a particular popular book series whose commitment to literal interpretation extends to portraying these as actual tiny insects with human faces and scorpion tails, but demon empowered, demon inspired, which is another interpretation, is that these are spiritual satanic type beings that are released to torment the people of the world.
Yeah,
which as that reading is quite possible. I think the popular fiction series' version of that is probably a little more improbable.
The reason we're not saying the name,
I don't know.
No.
Chris started not
that
saying
which
the name.
cannot be named.
You can say it if you want. I just didn't want to be too mean and call something out live and on air.
The only other thing is, why 5 months? Anything significant about the time? Time's going to be a big factor later on. So is this important?
I feel like what I read was similar to the half an hour of silence in heaven, that this is just a period of time that ensures that they can't actually, it's like it is a period of time. Like it is a judgment that is, the opportunity for repentance is still there, because you can't die from this. It's just a torment for a specific period of time. So it's more arbitrary than it is about a specific number, is kind of what I read. But I don't know, maybe you guys have read some other theories.
That's exactly what I read too.
Okay.
Although I did, if you take a Hebrew 28-day month, I think that's right, a lunar month, not a solar month, it is 140 days, and that's a pretty familiar number. But anyway.
Sorry, I did read one more. The lifespan of a locust might be around 5 months.
Okay, there you go.
So, although I can't speak for the lifespan of a locust with a scorpion's tail and a human face.
And long hair.
That could be very
genetically enhanced
locust.
We do. The locusts do have a leader.
Yes,
who's got 2 names, and he comes from the bottomless pit as well.
The
Abaddon.
angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon and Greek is Apollyon, that is destroyer.
The destroyer.
Yep.
Which is pretty much what those words translate to in both languages, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yep. Anything to say about him?
Doesn't seem like a great guy.
No.
I don't think there's anything super important to say about him, other than I'd say we probably don't identify this person with Satan himself. No. He just seems to be a demonic, almost a Deuteronomic, a demonic figure who is of some importance in that world.
But if you were to interpret this trumpet as referring to whether an actual contemporary to the time army, or a human army as representative of sort of the human capacity for violence and destruction, then I suppose calling out the fact that they are led by leaders and in some way directed by the whims and the vagaries of human wickedness, I think is maybe something that's worth meaningful.
Yeah, no, I think that's
particularly so the Parthians had a king,
exactly right,
and he would have been the destroyer if he come in and decided to sack Rome. So
and every group that has set itself up as a world power or empire or in opposition to God in any sense seems to have some kind of leader figure. Interesting that Jewish tradition has the angel of destruction over legions of scorpions in the pit.
Yeah.
So this is a familiar concept, and this leader potentially in Amos is
the Septuagint.
And the Septuagint version is connected to the king of Gog or King Gog.
King Gog.
And which,
hard to tell if Gog's a place or a person.
Correct. Which again is hard to tell later on.
Yeah.
When we get to it.
Yeah.
But that
Perhaps
is also
meant to be both.
Throw forward.
Yeah.
Because whoever this guy is, he's connected to the leadership in opposition to God. So that's not great. And so the first woe has passed. Behold, there are still 2.
Just lastly on, sorry, I know
that was a great segue.
We can just skip this if we want. But
now,
lastly, I'll make it last 10 seconds. Apollyon, some suggest that it might recall Apollo, whose name was said to connote destructive power in a connection with the Greco-Roman reading of it. Yeah. And actually, some Roman emperors also styled themselves as bearers of Apollo's power. So again, a bit of attack on Roman authority.
It was all the rage for quite a while there.
He also liked horses.
It's true.
And bows.
Well, there you go. So maybe it is valid.
If we're talking about Nero, yeah.
Well, okay. After this character gets introduced, we come to the sixth angel.
Well, that's kind of the last we hear of this character, right?
Well, pretty much. Yeah.
Yep. And we move on to
just a little cameo.
Gets named in 2 languages in one verse, and then
that's it. Yeah.
And yet they don't tell us who the Antichrist is. How rude.
The sixth angel. This is the second woe, and we're given that clue by the first woe is past, 2 other woes are yet to come.
Yep.
Here comes the sixth angel, and we get we'll get to these 4 angels at the River Euphrates in a second, but we get a kind of similar picture to the locusts and scorpions, but this time described as horses and riders with similar things, like their tails are like snakes, kind of similar imagery, and
they're very
got
colourful
these
armor,
smoke, fire, sulfur kind of things. But this time it's not just torment; it is death. So a bit more heightening. Yeah. But I guess let's talk about these 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates.
Yeah. What's the go with that?
Who are those guys? Have we seen them before?
Hard to say. What I was reading was essentially that they are potentially figurative of, again, like we said before, the nations who are on the other side of the Euphrates River. Also kind of alluding to the 4 corners, the 4 angels that come from the 4 winds.
Which was earlier in Revelation.
Earlier. So they've now become a destructive force, potentially on behalf of God, because the angels are bound at the river, but we're not really sure. They seem to be bad, but then we get, if you can take the Exodus motif, the angel of destruction in Exodus,
and Ezekiel too,
is not necessarily an evil agent, but someone carrying out God's instructions. And so it's quite ambiguous, I think. Obviously, the people on the horses who come are bad, but again, the 4 angels are released and they kill, but they appear as a multitude of these riders. Is that right? Is that because it's a bit ambiguous?
It is.
Yeah, I think
they're released, and all of a sudden there's millions of riders.
I think they're associated with the riders. Yeah. Either way,
this is my own speculation, but when I hear
sit down, ladies and gentlemen.
No, it's fine. It's just that this is not backed up by any sort of
gather around
academic scholarship. But when I hear the Euphrates, right, like I've always associated it with right back at the start with Genesis, because the Euphrates is one of the rivers whose headwaters are said to flow out of Eden. And so without any kind of other rigorous backing, immediately my mind goes, okay, angels bound at the far side of the Euphrates, cherubim who are placed at the entrance to the garden to prevent human beings from re-entering paradise, now have been there for all of eternity, which is what these angels are kind of said to have been bound there. Now released kind of on their last final mission is just, I don't know. That's just an association that my mind makes, but it's thin.
I hear you.
Well, except, Chris, just to encourage you and just to take the teachable moment, the hermeneutical principle of the law of first mentions is valid, and that is it. And so, that's not an incorrect suggestion to make. Well done.
There's probably I think there's PhD in that.
Well, quite possibly, and I suddenly feel.
Can I follow in your footsteps, Chris? Using the hermeneutical law of first mentions. First mention in Revelation, like you briefly mentioned, Joe, the 4 angels that hold back the winds.
Yes.
And they're holding back the destruction and the judgment. And
Correct.
Here we see 4 angels that are kind of prevented up until this point are bound from unleashing that judgment. So perhaps there is a correlation there as well. But not that these are the same 4 angels, but
no, but there's a connection. There's semantic
echoes and whispers,
and also Euphrates is quite regularly connected to Babylon and all that Babylon has. And so, are we seeing now the scope of the cosmological universal scope being brought down to what's going to become more and more pointed as we journey through Revelation, which is this universal spiritual destruction which is visited on the physical world is going to become more and more focused into figures and places and events, which we're going to get a little snapshot of in a little bit. Possibly.
On the contrary to the thought that these are angels, there is a bit of New Testament precedent for fallen angels being bound until the end of the world, and in which case they're then released to wreak havoc and destruction and judgment on the world. That's from Jude and 2 Peter. Similar passages. But they're confined in like an underworld kind of situation, I believe, in those passages. So.
Yeah, and these are angels who are bound, but then it says they are prepared for the day, and very specifically hour, day, month, and year. So there is an intentionality.
I take that to be John and God, or the theological point being things aren't spiraling out of control. This isn't chaos, but God's plan is very much unfolding according to how he wants it to in his sovereignty, even to the very second, even though the world looks like it's descending into chaos. So I feel like that's why the mention of day, month, year, hour, etc. But
again, still connections back to the Old Testament. This is very much like the smoke and sulfur is like the destruction of Sodom, very similar to that, which is all alluded to in all of this. Angels visiting destruction, these results. People are allowed to die now, which is not good.
Again, though, it's only a third of mankind, as it has been all the way through these judgments. So, and that leads you all the way up to verse 20, where the point being made through all of this is that the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent, which is kind of the bit where you go, whoa.
Which implies, I think, as we read that, is that there is a portion of what's being poured out, which is in order to let people know that this is an appropriate time to repent, to turn back. Would that be the implication of that passage is even there?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
It's like, what fools, this is your opportunity.
Which, again, is completely reminiscent and indicative of the Exodus scene.
Yeah,
these plagues are happening. These outrageous and horrific things are happening.
But the hearts are hardened.
And there's this constant, will you now repent? As in, will you turn from your current course of action to a different one? Will you turn from moving away from God back toward God? And sadly...
So can I just backtrack slightly?
You can.
I don't know if whether you guys said this explicitly, but are you associating the horses... in their breastplates and colors and their, tails of snakes with heads with the locusts who are like horses, armed for battle. They, have stings in their tails. Are we sort of, again, getting two pictures of more or less the same concept?
I feel like, yes. I don't know if that extends to these are one and the same group, or whether they're two groups that use similar imagery and the second one's like a slightly heightened, I guess. But yeah, I think they're getting at the same concept for sure.
It could very well be, and because we've got this pattern of 4, 2, 1.
Yeah.
It's
with interlude.
Yeah, with interlude. This is the second grouping, so 5 and 6 together.
So they go hand in hand.
So they have to go hand in hand. If you go back to the pattern of the previous lot of 7, 5 and 6 is the 5th seal is the altars the souls under the altar crying out, and the 6th seal is the earthquake, the sun being blackened, the sky falling. What I think is important and why it connects in, because those two things don't seem to be similar to all of this stuff, apart from some smoke, but the kings don't repent. The kings go, please hide us, and mountains fall on us and hide us, because we don't want to have to face God's wrath, which is very similar now to the unrepentant people of the world. So I don't know whether they're the same thing. They're obviously very similarly connected, and to keep the pattern there, maybe this is John seeing them in two different ways in order to keep this very clear, intentional rhythm of what God is pouring out.
To be fair, they do carry out two different actions.
They do.
The locusts torment and specifically cannot kill, whereas the horses, the 4 angels, synonymous, I guess, are instructed to kill.
But I think the hard bit is that we see in verse 19, the power of the horses in their mouths and their tails.
Yeah, which is exactly the same power. Yeah, I think regardless of whether they're two distinct groups, they have the same purpose of they're trying to provoke repentance.
Yeah. And
both fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Chris.
I don't know either, Chris.
I don't know either, Chris.
There's more than one Chris. Anything else to say?
I know at least 2 other Chris's.
There you go.
Wow.
Me too. Chapter 10, verse 1. Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head, and his face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. He had a little scroll open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and calling out with a loud voice, like a lion roaring. When he called out, 7 thunders sounded, And when the 7 thunders had sounded, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the 7 thunders have said and do not write it down. And the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, and the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay, but that in the days of the trumpet call to be sounded by the 7th angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. Then the voice that I heard from heaven spoke to me again, saying, Go, take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll. And he said to me, Take and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey. And I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it. And it was sweet as honey. And it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And I was told, You must again prophesy about many peoples and nations and languages and kings.
All right. So this time it's definitely an angel.
Yes.
Right? We can
A mighty angel.
It's a mighty angel. Some have thought that this is Jesus because it has similarities to the earlier vision.
Correct.
But I think there's enough different here. And whenever it is Jesus, it's quite clearly labeled as Jesus to differentiate him from angels.
It never says the name.
No.
Well, actually, it does in the first bit.
It does in chapter 1.
Yeah.
Yes. This doesn't say the name.
Or the lamb or something,
Some illusion.
Yeah. But here it quite clearly says angel. But he is, yes, a mighty angel. He's got a few distinguishing features.
Yeah.
To me, big evocations of the Colossus of Rhodes, right?
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
So,
explain
massive.
what that is for people
So
who
cool.
don't know.
One of the 7 wonders of the world, wonders of the ancient world, no longer with us, unless you're a Matthew Riley fan.
I love that. That book is great.
It's a great book. So a massive bronze statue that stood at the harbour of Rhodes, which is an island, a Greek island, or now off the coast of modern-day Turkey. Still part of Greece, modern day, I think.
Know.
I think it is,
so.
yeah.
And the statue was of the sun god Helios, so had a nice big sort of golden sun crown on his head, holding a torch, often considered to be kind of the inspiration for the Statue of Liberty type thing, and famously sort of was astride the harbour. So literally to get into the harbour, you had to sail between his legs. It was that big. So very impressive.
Wow.
So some allusion to that, potentially.
Yeah, well,
people may have had a picture, but by the time of John in Revelation,
well and truly
gone.
gone by the time of Revelation.
But I think you can definitely see that in that his face was like the sun, like you mentioned, Helios, even like rainbow above his head. His legs were like fiery pillars. Like I think all that language is there for that.
But again, like we've seen constantly, we're not saying that it is that. We're saying
it draws on that.
But that using imagery that everyone was familiar with to say, but God is greater. And reinterpreting, saying this is superior. So what we miss in the modern language, which is every time the scriptures say Jesus is Lord, that is using local language and a big up yours to the local authorities.
And I've got another one on
here.
that, another local language, this time Augustus. Yes. This is from Velius Paterculus, and Seneca as well, who might be the one you've heard of. But this is about Augustus. This is the quote, saw above his head the orb of the sun with a circle about it, coloured like the rainbow, seeming thereby to place a crown upon the head of the one destined soon to greatness. So there you go.
Classic.
Something they were familiar with was
revisionist history
faces like the suns and rainbows on their heads.
Yes.
Yeah.
Augustus, the son of God.
Yeah.
Brought in the peace of God. His birth brought good news, did you know?
Yes. Well, I've got that later. So
Oh, spoilers.
Do you
Sorry,
as well?
Alex. No, I don't. I just know that.
Okay. Well, they're going to mention good news soon. And
Indeed. Indeed. So the strong angel's probably not Jesus. There's got allusions to lots of powerful kind of semi-divine figures in the local context and culture, but is then obviously riffing off what Revelation has already described. So it's someone who's standing very much on behalf of God. With the imagery of Jesus in the first chapter, this is the same imagery, just about. Jesus has burnished bronze feet. This guy's got legs like fire.
Roars like a lion.
Clothed with a cloud. The Son of God comes on the clouds in Revelation 1. All very similar.
He was holding a little scroll.
Little, yes. And the good pick up before is the scroll little or the angel big.
Yeah. Or is just the scroll a normal scroll?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
It's the right size to eat, but
yeah.
you know.
So I guess the big debate around this scroll is, are we to identify this scroll with the scroll previously with the seals that the Lamb opens? Most of our modern translations identify it differently as a little scroll, but
which is in the Greek.
But what I was reading about the Greek, so the Greek word is biblaridion, I believe it is.
It is.
But what I was reading is that John uses various different words for scroll that seem to be somewhat interchangeable.
Except that
to an extent.
It is a diminutive description.
I saw that as well.
So it does mean
but maybe
smaller.
it's just little relative to the mighty angel.
Correct.
Angel, yeah.
But it does seem to be a different scroll than the one that's been opened, because this one we've had what's in the first scroll read out, which is the seals. And there's trumpets, and this scroll is not to be read out. And there's actually 7 things that happen here that we never get mentioned in the lots of 7 in Revelation, which is the 7 thunders.
Yes.
Which are another revelation which is written down but is not allowed to be shared.
I agree. I think that's the best way to read it as well. Some will read it as the same scroll using the pattern of Ezekiel, in which similarly a scroll written on both sides is then given to him to consume. But I think, like you said just then, Joe, I think, especially with the thunders one as well, I think the idea is that they're different. But even then, we have a few interpretations where these could be like 2 parallel scrolls. So in each scene, the one from chapter 5 and the one here, in each scene, a heavenly figure holds a scroll, which is then given to someone else. And as the seals are opened on the first scroll, a series of visions occur. And then since those seal visions lead directly into the trumpet visions, the contents of the first scroll would encompass, for example, chapters 6 to 11. And then the second scroll, which is now opened in chapter 10. And since its prophecies concern nations and kings, its content would be the visions in Revelation 12 to 22. That's a potential interpretation.
Well, I would disagree with that, because I think what's in the scroll is not what is prophesied.
Controversy.
Yeah.
Because what's in the second scroll is told to be sealed up and not shared. So I don't think that can be right.
Which leads to a final interpretation where there are 2 scrolls, one large and one small.
It's the Tupperware of scrolls.
Yes, the Russian dolls, yeah. And that's, because John, like you mentioned, Joe, uses different words to distinguish them. And these have variously been interpreted as to what bits of Revelation each scroll might refer to, whether that's chapters 6 to 9, 6 to 22, the entire apocalypse, or even the Old Testament has been suggested by someone, the contents of this little scroll. But many agree it includes the visions in Revelation 11 that we're about to see. So, yeah.
But it can't be though, right? We're not supposed to know what's in that. That's the whole point of this. It's sealed up.
Perhaps.
And it's not allowed to be shared.
Sorry, the little scroll?
Yeah. In verse 4.
But I mean,
seal up what's been said and don't write it down.
That's
and
true.
then he eats it.
He eats it. I was going to say he eats it, but yeah.
It's consumed.
Yeah.
So one of the theories I've read was that this is the redemptive plan that's going to happen on the other side of everything, which you don't need to know now. It's actually going to be
I saw that as well.
Why would that make your stomach turn sour though? Yeah. Because there's a sense of like there's an initial sweetness, but there's a sorrow and a mourning and
there's a few interpretations on that as well. Yeah.
I mean, even just in the reading of the final judgment, fulfillment, recreation moment, that's exactly the feelings you get. Is that because of the temporal view and that we're not in the new creation, there is the sense of loss and sorrow because not everyone will be there. So that's my personal opinion, which is also borne out in one of the commentaries.
See, Joe, seeing them as the same scroll in 5 and 10 gets around the problem of this scroll being
there's
unable
also the
to
fact
be revealed.
that what John is told not to write down is not what's in the scroll.
Yeah.
It's what the thunders say.
Yeah, that's a different one. That's not the little scroll.
So that may be quite.
That's why most of the
content.
Interpretations think that the little scroll refers to what's about to take place. In
We've
chapter
really
11.
gone out into the weeds.
Yes,
with this
anyway,
one.
let's recover. Let's recover. There are scrolls. There's one in chapter 5 and there's one here. Some people think it's the same. Some people think they're 2 different scrolls. Some people think they're like kind of parallel, similar imagery. That's the Cliff Notes. If you'd like a more in-depth discussion, please come speak to us in person or send us an email.
It's taking everything to not talk about this anymore. Okay, so
I think I would tend to favor, in general, what Alex laid out, and that is by the time we get to the point of John eating the scroll and then being told to prophesy, I think is an implication that something of what follows is what was
disclosed on the
is disclosed
scroll.
in this moment to him.
Yes, because he reads the scroll. It sounds like thunders. You can't actually say what the thunders said, so seal it back up and eat it.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't eat the thunders one. He eats the little scroll.
Yeah, well, that's
right?
the one that the angel reads from.
No, it doesn't say he reads from it. It just says that it's open, and he gives
open in his hand. Sorry,
and then he gives a shout, and those the voices of the seven thunders speaks.
Yeah.
So I think the thunders are just like a separate reality that we don't know anything about except for that one verse.
I always read it as what's on the scroll.
Yeah. I wonder if it's more akin to Moses in the cleft of the rock seeing, the Lord pass by, in the sense that something is revealed to John about the nature of God in the voices of the seven thunders that then, is either impossible to describe or that is only for him to have experienced in that moment. But again, some more speculation with Christopher.
Yeah.
It's a good one. I like it.
Well, through that discussion, we've summarized quite a lot of chapter 10, but that's
exactly right.
What happens next is, yes, the thunders kind of happen and we don't get much else about them. But
the only other thing to say is, and I haven't checked this, it's just a little thought coming to my brain, so maybe one of you who's got digital devices can search. I feel like it's in John's gospel, I know we may not be the same John, where God speaks and some people hear God's voice, some people hear thunder, and some people hear nothing when God speaks to Jesus. I think it's in chapter 6 or 7.
I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe Chris can fact check
I think it's at some point in there, which again will be quite obvious that God says something, but it's perceived as thunder, not as spoken words. And this is a communication, but not everyone's able to perceive what happens. But anyway, I could be completely wrong on where that reference is, but if it was both John, that'd be great.
Either way, I think the best way to read the seven thunders is like we read the seven trumpets, seals, bowls, angels, whatever, is another just indistinct, potentially non-identifiable group of heavenly bodies that is, uses the number of 7 and follows that pattern rather than specifically attributing it to something, although it very well could be the voice of God or the voice of Christ, etc. Yeah.
I just checked. It's John 12.
There you go.
Woohoo. Cool. So he has to eat it. It becomes bitter in his mouth and he has to prophesy.
By the way, all of this we did mention, this is like the interlude that matches the interlude of the previous.
Well, the first part of the interlude.
Yeah, well, the first part of the interlude. Yeah. But at this point, like we had with the seals, we're expecting that 7th seal or the 7th trumpet in this case, which is like, oh, is this the one, the judgment, the big one? But we get interrupted again, and this is kind of the first bit of that interruption. We should have mentioned that.
So this is kind of akin to the 144,000 sealed.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have this little switch where the perspective changes. So in there, John turns and the 144,000 become multitudes. Here, the word is released, it's consumed, and then he has to turn and prophesy. And so we kind of get this, John has to be the linchpin in the middle of the interlude, right? So he's the one who changes the focus and the attention. And then this sweet but bitter thing has to come out and is spoken about.
Should we talk about that? Should we talk about the sweet and bitter? Is there anything else before that you wanted to? Well, he eats this, he's commanded to eat, well, he actually asks, can I have the scroll? And gets the scroll, eats it, and which is following in the tradition of the prophets of Israel's history. Ezekiel famously eats a scroll, and it was also sweet like honey. But John's is both sweet and sour, and sweet and sour pork.
Probably not pork.
Probably not. But
famously probably not pork.
of all the things it could be, not pork, probably not sweet and sour calamari. Or sweet and sour oysters. Is this like Ezekiel's eating? Is this a commissioning scene? Is this John being commissioned or recommissioned halfway through the narrative to be God's agent of proclamation like Ezekiel? Is this a commissioning scene?
I think you can say that very much so with verse 11. Then I was told you must prophesy again, which is kind of like that formulaic language we see throughout Revelation, which this signals the start of the next section where he's going to prophesy about. So very much so. And at the very least, if not a direct commissioning scene, equates him with the prophets.
I'd say you'd have to say it's a recommissioning because I think we've already got our commissioning scene in chapter 1.
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely a recommissioning.
Yeah, it's like a recommissioning for sure. Yeah.
And also interesting, which we won't talk about now. It'll be in the next episode when we get to chapter 11. But like Ezekiel, it's not necessarily always just spoken prophecy, but it's performative.
Sign acts.
It's sign acts. And so we get very much Ezekiel style happenings coming up in the next little while. But
the scroll is both sweet and bitter, or sweet and sour. And this has had various interpretations throughout history and even today. Should we touch on some of them very briefly? I think the first possible interpretation is that the message holds sweet salvation for the righteous, but bitter judgment for the unrepentant.
Makes enough sense.
Yep, that makes enough sense. Another one you could have is that the vocation of a prophet includes the sweetness of a call from God and the bitterness of rejection by other people. So particularly evokes Jeremiah. And then I think perhaps the one that is most plausible is that the Christian community will learn that the scroll is sweet because of its message of salvation, but it is bitter because God's purposes in salvation will be accomplished in part through the suffering and witness of his people. For me, that's the most plausible one. Yeah.
Which plays into a lot of the different views on how chapter 11 is interpreted.
That's right.
Understood.
Yeah. The idea being that God's kingdom is coming and will come and his people will receive their rewards, but this way of redemption entails the suffering of the faithful in that process. So it is bittersweet in a way. Yeah.
But again, we're just seeing John recommissioned with what the people of God have been commissioned with for all of the narrative story. And so we do see the consistency of God and the faithfulness of God to continue, that there's a declaration of good news, which we talked about, and the opportunity to respond to that, but also the ramifications for living a life that's in complete opposition or defiance or rejection of God. That also has ramifications.
Absolutely. Any more to say about chapter 10, gentlemen?
Nothing more than except that it seems to be the trigger now to start the final round of everything.
The final woe.
Yeah, the final woe, which leads us into the final 7 set that we have, which leads us up to the final judgment and the final D/reconstruction. But the only thing we didn't pick up is that there does seem to be, through all of these horsemen and trumpets and woes, the decreation process again, which we've talked about a lot when we were in Genesis, particularly that primeval history, the Genesis 1 to 11.
Briefly when we talked about the abyss.
Yeah. But it does seem to be escalating, that there's a decreation because it's preparing for the recreation, which is coming.
The new creation.
Which again is potentially what's alluded to but not yet revealed. You know, this is the mystery of God, is that he's got something planned but no one's really sure. We just know that Jesus is king. He's going to make it all right, but what will it be like? And so there is this layering up of what's going to happen next.
Well, congratulations if you made it this far. Comment locust if you made it this far.
Hashtag locust.
Hashtag locust if you made it this far.
Stingers.
Seriously, congratulations, because even we got stuck in the weeds a bit there, didn't we?
We did.
But that was bound to happen
but
at
it's
some
tricky.
point with
Look,
Revelation.
actually, to be fair, I think chapter 11 is often considered the most difficult.
I think next week's going to get exciting.
But
they're interrelated, 10 and 11.
They are. So I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, wrestle with this as we wrestle with it, because it's a wrestle.
Yeah.
We don't have all the answers, but we're just trying to help. So
Beale and Keener do. So.
Yeah, those guys do.
They seem to. They've written enough.
Yeah. Please send through any questions you have to our email or on our socials, Facebook and Instagram. Or if you know us in person, you can always ask us as well. Yeah, you won't find us there.
Well, maybe individually.
Yeah.
I don't think I've used my Twitter account in years.
No, I got rid of it.
I don't think I've got rid of it. I've just neglected it.
Guys, I feel like this is a conversation you can probably have after the podcast is finished.
Quite possibly.
Okay.
But, you know,
thank you everyone for joining
decision.
us, and we will see you next episode where we get to talk about the 2 witnesses, the great city, a great conflict with a woman and a dragon. Very exciting. Definitely come back next week.
Dragons.
Yeah.
Next time they're dragons.
Very cool.
Yes.
Goodbye, everybody.